Hey, happy Monday, y'all. I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. Obviously, I know nothing too exciting could have gone on, but hopefully it wasn't boring and awful. So I hope you're doing well today. This is going to be a really short video. I just want to talk through the food web assessment that you guys should have completed last week and give you some answers for that just so you can check back and look at your responses. Please know that some of these questions were pretty open-ended. Really what I was looking for the most was your ability to kind of analyze the situation and give potential what am I trying to say? Potential effects for the specific situation. As we kind of keep traveling down this road of ecology basics, we'll start looking at these interactions a little bit more and kind of get a little bit more detailed as far as population growth and how populations will increase and decrease given certain situations. Right now we're pretty surface level when it comes to that. So I did get a few questions in regards to how detailed I wanted those answers in regards to if populations would increase or decrease at a certain rate. We're not quite there yet. Okay, so we're going to keep it pretty simple. So looking at the 6 questions that you had based on this food web, looks like most everybody did very, very, very well. There was one big confusion, and that was on question 1. So how many producers are there in this food web? So if we look at this food web, obviously we know our producers are always here at the bottom. Now in this, there are a couple organisms that were not explained as far as what they are, and that is the fungi and the bacteria. Okay, so yeah, these guys definitely are on this lower level, which we assume are producers, but fungi and bacteria actually are not producers. They are decomposers, and we very briefly mentioned them in our first lesson within this unit. Decomposers take the material and basically recycle it, break it down and recycle dead material into the producers, right? So you would not consider fungi or bacteria producers. Okay, so in this food web, there are 3 producers: the tree, the shrub, and the grass. Okay, the fungi and the bacteria would be decomposers. Okay, so then we have number 2, how many secondary consumers are there? So to understand secondary consumers, we got to figure out our primary consumers. Our primary consumers are those those herbivores that are eating the producers. So the primary consumers are the deer, the rabbit, the grasshopper, and the squirrel. Okay, we're focused on the secondary consumers. So the secondary consumers are going to be all the organisms that eat those 4 things, right? That eat the primary consumers. So there are, let me double check, make sure I got it right. There are 5 secondary consumers in here. Okay, we have the hawk because it eats the squirrel. We have the shrew because it's eating the grasshopper. The snake because it eats the rabbit. The insect-eating bird because it eats the grasshopper. And then the mountain lion because it's eating the deer. Okay, so those would all be secondary consumers to an extent. Now, again, one misconception, or I guess one confusion that a lot of people have had is, we can classify animals based on different things, right? So if let's say the hawk, for instance, that's our next question, but the hawk eats secondary consumers, but also eats primary consumers. So you can classify it as a secondary consumer, but you're also going to be able to classify it as a tertiary consumer because it's eating that shrew and the snake. Okay, so when we look at question 3, yes, it can be multiple types of consumers technically, if we're being really picky, and that would be a secondary consumer because it's eating the squirrel, right? And then a tertiary consumer as well because it's eating the shrew, the snake, and the insect-eating bird, which are all secondary consumers. Okay, so yes, you could consider that to be multiple types of consumers, but generally we're going to label an organism based on its highest level within that food web. So hawk technically is the tertiary consumer, but it can also be classified as a secondary consumer as well. So then we have number 4, explain all the effects that would be seen by this ecosystem if the grasshoppers went extinct. Okay, so grasshoppers go extinct. That is going to affect 2 organisms in particular, and that is the shrew and the insect-eating bird. Both of those organisms lose their food source. So both the shrew and the insect-eating bird would go extinct, right? Because they no longer have a food source, or they're going to have to find another food source, which at this point in time in this food web doesn't exist. So they would both go extinct. The other thing that would could occur, is the rabbit could start to thrive because it's going to lose a competitor, right? So it's going to be able to have more food accessible to itself because the grasshopper is not there eating that food anymore, right? Between the shrub and the grass. So the rabbit's going to have plenty of that. Okay, so moving to 5, deer reproduce rapidly and can be big problems in the ecosystem if their population grows too large. Due to this, humans hunt deer regularly to level out the deer populations. Based on this food web, what would be the negative effects if humans did not hunt deer and limit their population? So this is actually a real thing, right? So we hunt deer to limit their growth. And so what would be the potential problem if we did not do that? What you would begin to see is that the tree and the shrubs would start to just disappear, right? Because the deer are going to they're going to populate so much that they're eating so much of the shrub and trees that they're gone, right? And so we have a very limited amount of shrub and trees, which is then going to affect how much food's available to the deer, but also the other primary consumers. So it would then begin to affect those other populations of organisms because the food that they eat is no longer there because the deer is overeating it. Okay, so then that brings us to number 6. Recently, a new species of bird was introduced into the ecosystem. This bird is much faster and efficient at hunting than the original insect-eating bird. What would you predict that this new species would affect most, and how? Okay, so if we had a new bird introduced into this ecosystem that was better suited to hunting insect than this guy, the effect would be this guy would have competition, right? Which is going to limit its ability to eat, especially since the new bird is better suited to hunt. So therefore, this bird is probably going to start to decrease in population because it's going to be outdone, so to say, by that new bird. The other thing that could be affected is the shrew, because if that new bird is even outproducing the shrew as far as hunting the grasshoppers, then it's going to affect that population as well. Okay, so what we're starting to see is this idea of how competition and how these relationships within these ecosystems and within these food webs affect population growth. And that's really where we're going to start stepping into, is defining these different types of relationships that can occur within this food web, and then how those relationships then affect the growth of a population within an ecosystem. So throughout this week, we're going to start diving into that. We're going to start looking at the relationship aspect and how different organisms can have positive relationships, negative relationships, and neutral relationships within these ecosystems, and what those really look like. So hopefully you did really well on that. Double check your answers. You don't need to fix them. If you want to fix them, feel free. But this is more so just to make sure that you are good and understand where we're going with that. So have a wonderful day. I hope your week is excellent. As always, please let me know if you have any questions, and just keep dominating. Have a great one.